The heat in northern Florida during August is not just uncomfortable, it is suffocating. The air hangs thick, wet and heavy, pressing down on everything it touches like an invisible hand. In the summer of 2001, Jacksonville felt this weight more than usual. The city, sprawled across the winding St. Johns River, was a place where Spanish moss draped from ancient oaks, where strip malls sat beside century-old cemeteries, and where secrets had a way of sinking into the swampy earth, never to surface again. Until they did. Matilde. On the morning of August 14, 2001, a Tuesday, the sun rose over the Arlington neighborhood with the same brutal intensity it had for weeks. By 7 in the morning, the temperature was already climbing past 80 degrees. Humidity clung to skin like a second layer. It was the kind of morning where people moved slowly, where even breathing felt like work. For 32-year-old Vanessa Hartley, the day began like any other. She woke in her small rental house on Merrill Road, a quiet street lined with modest homes and overgrown hedges. Vanessa was a paralegal at a downtown law firm, a job she had held for nearly 6 years. She was known for her punctuality, her attention to detail, and her kind demeanor. Co-workers described her as someone who remembered birthdays, who always brought extra coffee for the office, who never missed a deadline. She lived alone. Her divorce had been finalized 2 years earlier, and while the split had been amicable, it left her starting over in her 30s. She did not complain. Vanessa was not the type to draw attention to herself. She kept her head down, did her work, and spent her evenings reading mystery novels on her back porch, a glass of sweet tea sweating in the summer air beside her. That morning she followed her routine. Shower, coffee, toast with strawberry jam. She dressed in a beige skirt and a light blue blouse, professional but not flashy. She gathered her purse, a brown leather bag she had owned since college, and locked the front door behind her. Her car, a silver Honda Accord with over 100,000 miles on it, sat in the driveway, baking under the early sun. She never made it to work. By 9 that morning, the receptionist at the law firm, a woman named Kelly Dupree, began to worry. Vanessa was never late. Not once in 6 years. Kelly called Vanessa's home phone. No answer. She tried again at 9:30. Still nothing. By 10, Kelly mentioned it to one of the senior partners, a man named Gregory Lowe. He frowned, checked his watch, and told Kelly to keep trying. At 11, Kelly called the police. The initial response was predictable. Adults go missing all the time, especially in a city the size of Jacksonville. The officer who took the call, a young patrolman named Derek Foss, noted the details but did not sound concerned. People oversleep. Cars break down. Maybe she had a family emergency. He told Kelly to wait a few more hours, and if Vanessa still had not shown up, to call back. But Kelly could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. She knew Vanessa. She knew her habits, her reliability. This was not like her. So Kelly did what any concerned friend would do. She drove to Vanessa's house herself. The drive from downtown to Arlington took 20 minutes. Kelly pulled up to the small house just after noon. The Honda was still in the driveway, and the front door was locked. The blinds were drawn. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. The newspaper. It sat on the front step, still rolled and wrapped in plastic. Vanessa always brought the paper inside before leaving for work. Kelly knocked. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time, calling Vanessa's name. Nothing. She walked around to the back of the house, peering through windows, but saw nothing unusual. Just a quiet, empty home. She returned to her car and called the police again. This time her voice was urgent. Officer Foss arrived at 1:15 in the afternoon. He spoke with Kelly, took down her statement, and agreed that the situation seemed off. He radioed for backup, and within 20 minutes, 2 more officers arrived. They forced entry through the front door. The house was undisturbed. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. The bed was made. The dishes in the sink were washed. Vanessa's purse was gone, but her keys were on the kitchen counter. That detail stopped everyone cold. Her keys, right there, next to a half-empty coffee mug. If Vanessa had left the house that morning, how did she lock the door behind her without her keys? The officers searched the house thoroughly, but nothing was missing. No forced entry. No blood, no weapons, no notes. It was as if Vanessa had simply vanished into thin air. But the car. The car was the next piece of the puzzle. Officer Foss approached the Honda and peered through the driver's side window. The interior was clean, neat. He tried the door. Landlocked. He radioed for permission to open it, and a supervisor arrived with a slim gym tool. And the door popped open with a metallic click. Inside, everything seemed normal, until Foss leaned in and saw it. On the passenger seat, partially tucked under a folded road map, was Vanessa's wallet. He picked it up carefully, opened it. Her driver's license stared back at him. Credit cards, insurance card, $23 in cash. All there. This one, what to go there. Now the situation had shifted. This was no longer a case of a missing adult who might have simply taken off for a few days. This was something else. Something darker. By late afternoon, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office had opened an official missing persons investigation. Detectives arrived at the scene. Photos were taken. Neighbors were interviewed. No one had seen anything unusual. No strange cars. No loud noises. No arguments. Vanessa Hartley had simply disappeared. The lead detective assigned to the case was a veteran named Thomas Birch. 47 years old, with over 2 decades on the force, Birch had seen his share of missing persons cases. Most ended within 72 hours. The person turned up alive, or they turned up dead. Rarely did they stay missing. But this case felt different from the start. The details did not add up. The locked door, the keys on the counter, the wallet in the car. Birch knew that in most abduction cases there were signs, but a struggle, and a witness. Something. Here there was nothing, just absence. My doom. The first 48 hours were critical. Birch and his team worked around the clock. They pulled Vanessa's phone records, but she had made no calls that morning. They checked her bank account. No activity since the day before. They interviewed her ex-husband, a man named Troy Medina, but he had an alibi. He was in Tallahassee on a business trip, confirmed by hotel records and co-workers. They spoke with her family. Vanessa's mother, a woman named Linda Hartley, lived in Georgia. She had last spoken to her daughter 3 days earlier, and the conversation had been normal. Vanessa had mentioned wanting to visit for Labor Day weekend, but there had been no indication of trouble, no mention of anyone bothering her, no concerns about her safety. Friends and co-workers were interviewed. Everyone said the same thing. Vanessa was kind, quiet, dependable. She did not have enemies. She did not owe money. She was not involved in anything dangerous or illegal. But too, she was, by all accounts, an ordinary woman living an ordinary life. Except now she was gone. By the end of the first week, the case had gone cold. There were no leads, no witnesses, no body. Vanessa Hartley had simply ceased to exist. But Detective Birch could not let it go. He kept the case file on his desk, reviewing it late into the night. He drove by her house on weekends, staring at the empty driveway, wondering what he was missing. He interviewed the neighbors again and again. He checked the woods behind her property, wading through thick underbrush and mosquito-infested swamps, looking for anything: a shoe, a piece of clothing, and a sign. Nothing. Nothing. Months passed. The investigation stalled. Other cases piled up. The media moved on. Vanessa's face, which had been plastered across local news stations for weeks, faded from memory. Her mother called Detective Birch every few weeks, asking if there was any news. There never was. By the end of 2001, the case was officially classified as cold. Vanessa Hartley was one of thousands of people who went missing in the United States every year. Most were never found. But then, in the spring of 2002, something strange happened. A hiker, a man named Philip Gaines, was exploring a remote section of the Timucuan Preserve, a sprawling nature reserve on the northern edge of Jacksonville. It was late April, and the weather had finally cooled. Philip was an amateur birdwatcher, and he had ventured off the main trail, chasing the call of a rare woodpecker. He found something else instead. And partially buried beneath a layer of leaves and dirt, near the base of a massive oak tree, was a brown leather bag. Philip recognized it immediately as a purse. He hesitated, then picked it up. It was damp, covered in mold, but intact. He opened it. Inside was a driver's license. The photo showed a woman with dark hair and kind eyes. The name read Vanessa Hartley. Philip called the police immediately. Within hours, Detective Birch was standing in the preserve, staring at the bag. His heart sank. After all these months, this was the first real piece of evidence. But it raised more questions than it answered. Why was the purse here, miles from Vanessa's home, in a place she had no known connection to? And more importantly, where was Vanessa? A full search of the area was launched. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Search teams combed through the preserve for days. They found nothing, no body, no clothing, no other belongings. Just the purse. The discovery reignited the investigation. Birch went back through every detail, every interview, every piece of evidence. He pulled old surveillance footage from gas stations and convenience stores near the preserve. He re-interviewed everyone connected to Vanessa. And then he found something. A small detail, something that had been overlooked before. A traffic camera near the intersection of Merrill Road and Arlington Expressway had captured footage from the morning of August 14, 2001. The footage was grainy, low quality, but it showed a silver Honda Accord passing through the intersection at 7:42 in the morning. The driver was a woman. Birch had seen this footage before, but he had assumed it was Vanessa, heading to work. Now he looked closer. He enhanced the image as much as the technology of the time allowed. And he saw something that made his blood run cold. There was someone else in the car. In the passenger seat, a figure barely visible, but there. Someone was with Vanessa that morning. Birch pulled every piece of footage he could find from cameras in the area. He traced the route of the Honda. It did not head downtown toward Vanessa's office. Instead, it turned north, toward the preserve. The car had been driven to the preserve. Vanessa had been taken there. But by whom? And why? Birch ran the license plate through every database available. He checked for any other sightings of the car. He found one. A gas station just outside the preserve had a security camera, and the footage from that day was still archived. Birch watched it, frame by frame. At 8:07 in the morning, the Honda pulled into the gas station. A man got out of the driver's seat. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing jeans and a dark t-shirt. He filled the tank, paid in cash, and got back in the car. The footage was too grainy to make out his face clearly, but Birch could see enough. The man was white, with short hair, and he moved with confidence, like he knew exactly what he was doing. The Honda left the gas station and headed deeper into the preserve. That was the last confirmed sighting of the car with Vanessa inside. Birch now had a suspect. A man. Unidentified but real. Someone who had taken Vanessa, driven her to the preserve, and left her purse behind. But where was she? And who was he? The investigation intensified. Birch worked with the FBI to create a profile of the suspect. They believed he was someone Vanessa knew, or at least someone she trusted enough to get into a car with. The lack of a struggle suggested she had gone willingly, at least at first. But no one in Vanessa's life fit the description. Her ex-husband was shorter, heavier. Her co-workers, her friends, her neighbors, none of them matched the figure in the footage. Birch was stuck again. Years passed. The case went cold once more. Detective Birch retired in 2008, but he never forgot Vanessa Hartley. He kept a copy of the case file at home, in a box in his garage. He would pull it out sometimes, late at night, and stare at the grainy image of the man at the gas station, wondering who he was. In 2015, advancements in technology brought new hope. Facial recognition software had improved dramatically, and Birch, now in his 60s and living a quiet life in a retirement community, heard about it and contacted the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. He convinced them to run the gas station footage through the new system. It took months. The footage was old, degraded, difficult to work with. But finally, in early 2016, the system returned a match. The man in the footage was identified as Leonard Pike. Leonard Pike, 49 years old at the time of Vanessa's disappearance, a resident of Jacksonville, and here was the chilling part. Leonard Pike had been questioned in connection with another missing woman in 1997, a woman named Brenda Colson, who had vanished under similar circumstances. No body had ever been found. No charges had been filed. Pike had been cleared due to lack of evidence. Now, Detective Birch, even in retirement, knew they had their man, but proving it was another matter entirely. Pike was still alive, still living in Jacksonville, working as a landscaper. He had no criminal record, no arrests, no red flags, just a quiet life in a quiet neighborhood. Birch pushed the current investigators to reopen the case. They did. In 2018, they executed a search warrant on Pike's property. They found nothing. No evidence linking him to Vanessa or Brenda. But they did find something odd. A storage unit, rented under a false name, linked to Pike through old financial records. The storage unit was opened in 2019. Inside, detectives found boxes of women's belongings, jewelry, clothing, personal items, among them a pair of earrings that matched a description given by Vanessa's mother. Earrings Vanessa had been wearing the last time Linda saw her. Leonard Pike was arrested in March 2020. He was charged with the kidnapping and murder of Vanessa Hartley. He was also charged in connection with the disappearance of Brenda Colson and two other women whose belongings were found in the storage unit. Pike maintained his innocence. He claimed the storage unit was not his, that he had been framed, but the evidence was overwhelming. Forensic analysis linked fibers from the storage unit to his vehicle. DNA evidence, though circumstantial, placed him at the scene, and the trial began in late 2023. It was a media sensation. The Jacksonville community was shocked. Leonard Pike had been their neighbor, their landscaper, a man who seemed normal, even friendly. How could he have done this? The prosecution laid out their case methodically. The traffic camera footage, the gas station video, the storage unit, the earrings, the pattern of missing women. Pike sat in the courtroom, expressionless, never showing emotion. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that Pike was being railroaded for crimes he did not commit. They pointed to the lack of bodies, the lack of direct physical evidence tying him to the murders. They argued that someone else could have rented the storage unit, that the belongings could have been planted. But the jury did not buy it. In January 2024, Leonard Pike was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And yet, even now, as Pike sits in a maximum security prison in northern Florida, one question remains unanswered. Where is Vanessa Hartley? Where are the bodies of the other women? Pike has never spoken. He has never confessed. He has never led authorities to the remains. Somewhere, in the swamps and forests of northern Florida, Vanessa and the others still rest. Hidden, lost, waiting to be found. The detective Thomas Birch, now 70 years old, still thinks about the case. He thinks about the day he stood in that preserve, holding Vanessa's purse, knowing she was out there somewhere. He thinks about her mother, Linda, who passed away in 2022, never knowing what happened to her daughter. And he thinks about Leonard Pike, sitting in his cell, keeping his secrets locked away, taking them to the grave. The case is closed. Justice, in a legal sense, has been served. But for the families, for the investigators, for anyone who followed this story, the mystery lingers. And the questions remain. What really happened on that August morning in 2001? What did Leonard Pike do to Vanessa Hartley? And why has he never said a word? Some answers, it seems, are meant to stay buried. The conviction of Leonard Pike should have brought closure. In most cases, when the guilty verdict comes down, when the judge delivers the sentence, when the courtroom erupts in tears and relief, that is when the story ends. The families grieve, the community heals, and life slowly returns to normal. But this case was different, because Leonard Pike refused to speak. He sat through his trial in silence, watching the evidence pile up against him with the same blank expression he wore when trimming hedges or mowing lawns. He never testified, he never explained. He never confessed. And so, even as he was led away in handcuffs to begin his life sentence, the real horror of what he had done remained locked inside his head. For the investigators who had worked the case, this silence was maddening. Detective Thomas Birch, now retired but still deeply invested in the outcome, felt the weight of it every day. He had hoped that the trial would force Pike to reveal where the bodies were, and that the pressure of a guilty verdict would crack his resolve. But Pike was not like other killers. He did not want attention. He did not want notoriety. He simply wanted to disappear into the system, taking his secrets with him. In the months following the conviction, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office continued to search for Vanessa Hartley and the other victims. They used ground-penetrating radar in the Timucuan Preserve. They brought in anthropologists and forensic experts. They drained sections of swampland, sifted through mud and vegetation, hoping to find something, anything. They found nothing. It was as if Pike had been meticulous in his disposal of the bodies, choosing locations so remote, so inaccessible, that they might never be discovered. Or perhaps he had used methods that left no trace. Some investigators theorized that he had weighted the bodies down and sunk them in the St. Johns River, where the dark, murky water would hide them forever. Others believed he had buried them deep in the woods, in unmarked graves that would take decades to locate. But there was another theory, one that was whispered among the detectives but never officially pursued. What if Leonard Pike had help? What if he was not acting alone? This theory gained traction when, in the summer of 2024, a woman named Diane Kruger came forward with a disturbing story. Diane was 58 years old, a lifelong Jacksonville resident who had known Leonard Pike in the late 1990s. She had never spoken to police before, she claimed, because she had been too afraid. But now, with Pike behind bars, she felt safe enough to tell what she knew. Diane met with investigators in a small interview room at the sheriff's office headquarters. She was nervous, fidgeting with her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. She told them that in 1998 she had briefly dated Leonard Pike. The relationship had lasted only a few months before she ended it, sensing something off about him. He was controlling, she said. He asked too many questions about her daily routine, her friends, her family. He wanted to know where she was at all times. But it was not just Pike who had made her uncomfortable. It was his brother, a man named Eugene Pike. Eugene was older than Leonard by 3 years. He was quieter, more withdrawn. He worked as a mechanic at a small garage on the outskirts of the city. Diane had met him a handful of times, and each encounter had left her unsettled. Eugene had a way of staring at people, she said, not in a curious way, but in a way that made her skin crawl, like he was studying her, calculating. Diane recalled one particular evening when she had gone to Leonard's house for dinner. Eugene had been there, sitting in the living room, saying nothing. Leonard had cooked, and the three of them ate in near silence. At one point, Eugene had excused himself and gone outside. Diane had gotten up to use the bathroom, and as she walked down the hallway, she noticed that the door to the garage was slightly open. She peeked inside. Nay, what she saw stopped her cold. The garage was immaculate. Tools hung on pegboards in perfect rows. The floor was spotless. But in the corner, half hidden by a tarp, was a large chest freezer. It was running, humming quietly. Diane did not think much of it at the time. Lots of people had freezers in their garages, but something about it felt wrong. The way it was positioned, tucked away, almost hidden. The way Eugene had glanced at it when he walked back inside, a quick, furtive look. But Diane broke up with Leonard a week later. She never went back to his house. She never saw Eugene again. And she tried to forget the entire experience. And she tried to eat den, Dean. But when she saw Leonard's face on the news in 2020, when she heard about the charges, the memory came rushing back. The freezer, the way Eugene had looked at it, the silence between the brothers. She wondered if she should say something, but fear held her back. What if she was wrong? What if it meant nothing? It was not until the trial ended, until Leonard was locked away, that Diane finally found the courage to come forward. The investigators listened to her story with growing interest. They pulled records on Eugene Pike. He was 67 years old, living in a trailer park in Yulee, a small town just north of Jacksonville. He had no criminal record, no history of violence. But when they dug deeper, they found something odd. In 2002, Eugene had sold his house in Jacksonville and moved to Yulee. The timing was suspicious. Just months after Vanessa's purse had been found in the preserve. They also discovered that Eugene had owned a boat in the early 2000s. A small fishing boat, registered in his name, docked at a marina on the St. Johns River. The boat had been sold in 2003. But the records showed that Eugene had used it frequently between 2000 and 2002, often taking it out late at night. The pieces were starting to fit together. If Leonard had killed the women, Eugene could have helped him dispose of the bodies. The boat would have been the perfect tool. Load the bodies onto the boat, take them out into the river, weigh them down, and let the water do the rest. But proving it was another matter. Eugene Pike was not going to confess. And without a body, without physical evidence, the case against him was purely circumstantial. In October 2024, investigators obtained a warrant to search Eugene's trailer in Yulee. The property was small, cluttered, filled with the debris of a life lived in isolation. But Eugene was not home when the police arrived. He was at work, repairing a truck at the garage. They tore the trailer apart. They searched every inch of the property, looking for anything that might connect him to the missing women. They found it in the shed behind the trailer. A small, rusted metal box, buried under a pile of old tarps and tools. Inside the box were photographs. Dozens of them. Pictures of women. Some were candid shots taken from a distance. Women walking to their cars. Women sitting in cafes. Women at the grocery store. None of them were aware they were being photographed. And among the photos, the investigators found something that made their blood run cold. A Polaroid picture of Vanessa Hartley. She was standing in her driveway, next to a silver Honda Accord. The photo had been taken from across the street, through the gap in a hedge. The date stamp on the back of the Polaroid read August 12, 2001, 2 days before she disappeared. Eugene Pike was arrested that evening. He was charged as an accomplice to kidnapping and murder. The evidence was damning. The photographs, the boat, the timing of his move, the connection to his brother. But Eugene, like Leonard, refused to talk. He sat in the interrogation room, arms crossed, staring at the wall. He did not ask for a lawyer. He did not deny the charges. He simply said nothing. His trial began in the spring of 2025. The prosecution argued that Eugene and Leonard had worked together, that they had stalked and abducted women over the course of several years, and that Eugene had helped his brother dispose of the bodies in the river. They presented the photographs as evidence of premeditation. They brought in experts who testified about the boat, the timeline, the pattern of behavior. The defense argued that the photographs proved nothing, and that taking pictures was not a crime, that Eugene had no direct connection to any of the disappearances, that the prosecution was grasping at straws, trying to pin unsolved cases on an innocent man simply because he was related to Leonard Pike. The jury deliberated for 3 days. In the end, they found Eugene Pike guilty of conspiracy to commit kidnapping. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. But still no bodies. Still no answers. The brothers, now both incarcerated in separate facilities, remained silent. They did not communicate. They did not write letters. They did not make phone calls. It was as if they had made a pact long ago to never speak of what they had done. And so the families of Vanessa Hartley, Brenda Colson, and the other missing women were left in a state of suspended grief. They knew what had happened, or at least they knew who was responsible. But without the bodies, without the final piece of the puzzle, they could not truly say goodbye. Linda Hartley, Vanessa's mother, had died in 2022, her heart broken by years of unanswered questions. But Vanessa's younger sister, a woman named Rebecca Tate, continued to search. She organized volunteer search parties. She hired private investigators. She spent her weekends walking through the Timucuan Preserve, looking for anything that might lead her to her sister. In the fall of 2025, Rebecca received a strange phone call, and the voice on the other end was muffled, barely audible. The caller claimed to be a former inmate who had been housed in the same facility as Leonard Pike. The man said that Pike had spoken to him once, late at night, in the darkness of their cell block. Pike had been drunk on homemade prison alcohol, and for a brief moment his guard had slipped. He had said something about the water, about how the river keeps secrets, about how the bodies were not in the preserve, not in the woods, but somewhere deeper, somewhere the searchers had never looked. The caller hung up before Rebecca could ask more questions. She tried calling back, but the number was disconnected. She reported the call to the authorities, but they were skeptical. The prison informants were notoriously unreliable, and the story sounded too vague to be useful. But Rebecca could not let it go. She spent hours poring over maps of the St. Johns River, studying its currents, its depths, its tributaries. She consulted with marine biologists and hydrologists, trying to understand where a weighted body might settle, where it might remain hidden for decades. And then, in January 2026, she found something. A deep channel in the river, near the point where it widened and flowed into the Atlantic Ocean. The channel was over 50 feet deep, with a silty bottom that had not been disturbed in years. It was remote, accessible only by boat, and it had never been searched. Rebecca contacted the sheriff's office. She begged them to search the channel. They were hesitant. The cost would be significant. The chances of finding anything after so many years were slim, but Rebecca would not give up. She started a crowdfunding campaign, raising money for a private search. The story went viral. Within weeks, she had raised over $200,000. In March 2026, a team of professional divers was hired to search the channel. They used sonar equipment, underwater cameras, and remotely operated vehicles. The search took 5 days. The water was dark, the visibility near zero. But on the afternoon of the 5th day, the sonar detected something. A large, irregular object on the bottom of the channel. The divers went down. What they found was a rusted metal drum, the kind used to store chemicals or oil. It was sealed, bound with chains. The divers brought it to the surface. The drum was opened on the deck of the boat. Inside, wrapped in heavy plastic, were human remains. The body was badly decomposed, but enough tissue remained for identification. DNA testing confirmed what everyone already knew. It was Vanessa Hartley. She had been in the river for nearly 25 years. Weighted down, hidden in the deepest part of the channel, exactly where Leonard Pike had put her. The discovery broke the case wide open. Over the next several months, divers found 3 more drums in the same area. Each one contained the remains of a missing woman, Brenda Colson, a woman named Angela Morse, who had disappeared in 1999, and a woman named Tricia Vaughn, who had vanished in 2000. All 4 women had been killed by Leonard Pike, with the help of his brother Eugene. All 4 had been disposed of in the river, in a location chosen for its depth and isolation, and all 4 had remained there, undiscovered, for decades. Leonard and Eugene Pike were charged with 4 additional counts of first-degree murder. Neither brother spoke. Neither offered any explanation, any apology, any remorse. Their final sentencing hearing took place in August 2026, and the families of the victims were allowed to speak. Rebecca Tate stood at the podium, tears streaming down her face, and told the court what her sister had meant to her. She spoke of birthdays and holidays, of late-night phone calls and inside jokes, of a life stolen and a grief that would never fully heal. Leonard Pike sat in the courtroom, staring straight ahead, his face empty. Eugene sat beside him, equally blank. The judge sentenced them both to death, though given their ages and the length of the appeals process, it was unlikely either would ever be executed. They would die in prison, taking whatever other secrets they had to their graves. But at least now the families had answers. At least now they could bury their loved ones. At least now the mystery was solved. Or was it? Then, in the months following the discovery of the bodies, investigators continued to review the evidence, and they noticed something troubling. The photographs found in Eugene's shed included images of over 30 different women. Only 4 bodies had been recovered. What happened to the others? Some of the women in the photographs were identified. They were still alive, living normal lives, unaware that they had ever been targeted, but others could not be identified. The photos were old, the faces unclear. And some of those women matched the descriptions of other unsolved missing persons cases from the same time period. How many victims were there really? How many bodies were still out there, hidden in the river, buried in the woods, lost to time? The investigators may never know. Leonard and Eugene Pike have taken those answers with them into their cells, and they are not talking. The case of Vanessa Hartley and the Jacksonville disappearances is now closed, at least officially. But for the families, for the investigators, for anyone who followed this story, the horror lingers. The knowledge that 2 men, 2 brothers, spent years stalking and killing women, disposing of their bodies with methodical precision, and nearly got away with it. And the fear that somewhere, in the dark waters of the St. Johns River, or in the deep woods of northern Florida, there are more victims. Women whose names we do not know. Women whose families still wait for answers. Because in the end, the Pike brothers did not just take lives. They took closure. They took peace. They took the one thing that every family of a missing person desperately needs. And the truth. The truth. And let go. And some truths, it seems, are buried so deep that they may never be found. Detective Thomas Birch passed away in November 2026, just months after the final sentencing. He died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by family. At his funeral, Rebecca Tate spoke. She thanked him for never giving up, for keeping her sister's case alive when everyone else had moved on. She said that without his determination, Vanessa might never have been found. But even in death, Birch carried the weight of the unsolved. His family found the case file in his garage, covered in notes and annotations, filled with questions he had never been able to answer. On the last page, in his handwriting, was a single sentence. How many more? And that question haunts Jacksonville to this day. Every time a woman goes missing, every time a body turns up in the river, people wonder, could it be connected? Could the Pike brothers have been responsible for more than we know? The answer, like so many things in this case, remains hidden, locked away in the minds of 2 silent killers, buried beneath years of lies and secrets. And perhaps that is the most terrifying part of all. Not what we know, but what we will never know. Not the crimes that were solved, but the ones that never will be. The Jacksonville cold case is closed. But the nightmare is not over. It never will be. Because somewhere out there in the darkness, the truth still waits. Hidden, patient, watching, just like Leonard and Eugene Pike once watched their victims from the shadows, from across the street, through the gap in the hedge, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, they took everything. Lives, futures, hope, leaving behind only questions, only grief, only the unbearable weight of not knowing. That is the legacy of the Pike brothers. Not just murder, but mystery. Not just death, but disappearance. Not just horror, but the kind of evil that lingers long after the case is closed, long after the verdicts are read, long after the bodies are buried. Because some evils cannot be fully understood. Some killers cannot be fully explained. Some cases, even when solved, remain unsolved in the ways that matter most. And in Jacksonville, on quiet August mornings when the heat hangs heavy and the air feels thick enough to choke, people still think about Vanessa Hartley. About the ordinary woman living an ordinary life, who walked out of her house one morning and never came back. They think about how easily it could have been them, how close the danger was, how it moved among them, unseen for years, and they remember that monsters are real, that they do not always look like monsters, that sometimes they look like landscapers and mechanics, like brothers, like neighbors, like the man who mows your lawn, or fixes your car, or waves at you from across the street. And that is the most terrifying truth of all.